The book of Revelation kind of takes place on two different spheres. There's the part that's going on earth, and there's a part that's going on in heaven. And that's how I've chosen to divide how we're going to cover the book of Revelation in a couple weeks. We're going to talk about what happens on earth, and next week we're going to talk about what happens in heaven. Now you can imagine which of these sermons are going to be more negative or more positive, okay? And today we're going to go through the kind of the bad stuff, what's going on earth at the end of time. But when we get to next week, we'll have a pretty upbeat sermon, and it'll make us excited about what waits for those that are the children of God. We're going to have to go through some of the terrible stuff today. If you leave here wishing that you would have had an inspirational, feel-good sermon, you're not going to get that today, all right? So I'm just warning you now. Just bring your expectations down. There is an element to all the judgment of God that does give comfort to our hearts, and we'll get to that in here. So there is an element. There are some silver linings in the midst of it. So keep your eyes open for those silver linings. But if you leave here feeling frightened or depressed or overwhelmed, that would be the natural response. I've been reading this stuff and studying it for weeks, and it kind of has clouded my whole vision, but it also has sharpened my vision, because if we want to live in light of the future, then it does change how we live now. So let's just go through this together. We know that the first time that the Son of God came to the earth 2,000 years ago, he came to bring his love, to bring the truth, to bring the grace of God to mankind. And that is what we've been able to experience for the almost 2,000 years since Jesus came. But there's going to come a time when the Son of God is going to return again, but a very different side of the Son of God that we didn't see in the Gospels. We're going to see that the God that's going to return next time, as Jesus returns, he's going to come bringing his wrath, bringing the judgment upon the evil, upon the sin, upon the destruction that mankind has brought to all of his glory. And so that's what we're going to kind of take a look at today. What does the wrath of God look like? What does God look like when he's angry? It's a side of God we don't like to think about, and fortunately, we don't have to live under that wrath now, because he's offering us forgiveness. He's offering us grace. He's being patient, and he's saying, even though we sin, even though we displease and we mock his name by our actions and our attitudes and the things we say, he's offering us his love and compassion and forgiveness. And so that's the good part of it right now, is we don't have to be afraid of these things, because if we accept this grace right now, then the things that we talk about today will not be things that we have to experience, the wrath of God. So that's a good side of things. But it also motivates us to think about others. We don't want them to experience the wrath of God. And so it motivates us to want to reach out and to see more people brought in to the faith that we have. When we talk about the book of Revelation, again, it's the book at the end of the book, as the choir sang about today. We get to see the last chapter, how it's all going to end. Some people call the book Revelations. They put an S on the end. It doesn't have an S on the end. It's Revelation. It is the revelation of Jesus Christ. It comes from the very first phrase of chapter 1, verse 1. It says the revelation of Jesus Christ. Because the disciple John, when he was about an old man, maybe about 90 years old, he was in exile because of his faith. He was on a deserted island. And while he was there, Jesus came to him and opened up all of heaven and the future, and gave this to John, a vision, a revelation of what was to come. And John penned everything that he saw and everything that he heard. And that's what we have, the book of Revelation, the revelation of Jesus Christ. Of course, to John, this was a vision, this was a revelation to him, and it's a revelation to us, something that's revealed. But what the book really is about is Jesus being revealed in the end. And it's true that there will come a time when everyone on this planet, whether they worshiped him as Lord or not, they'll have a chance to be able to see who Jesus is in all of his glory. And that at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that he is Lord. Whether they do it out of a desire to do it or not, they're going to see that take place. And so the revelation of Jesus Christ is when he comes back and he's revealed again.
in your sermon notes, I hope you can take these home. I've prepared these for you because what I have here is some study guides, some outlines of the book of Revelation. I would really encourage you to go home and sometime during the week start reading through Revelation. And you can use these things as kind of a guide because it kind of breaks it down for us. Because when we just read it through, if we don't really know what we're getting into, it's kind of confusing because some things are not chronological. And because some things are symbolic, some things are literal, it's kind of hard sometimes to understand some of that. And hopefully what I've done here and some notes that I've put on there is kind of help you to kind of read through it. If you want to read through it in the way that you just read about the chapters that talk about heaven, I've got them listed. What chapters talk about heaven? If you want to read just what's going on earth, you can read those chapters, okay? If you just want to read it straight through, then you can kind of follow the little outlines I give here so you can kind of see where it's going during that time. So I want this to be a study guide to help us to dig into it. So I encourage you to take some time and look into the book of Revelation. The chapters aren't all clear-cut, so some chapters may basically take place on earth, but it may talk a little bit about heaven, but I've tried to break them down as evenly as I could for you. So hopefully we'll be able to do that. There are two sections of Revelation that we're not going to talk about in the sermons today. The first section is the first 3 chapters that basically, when Jesus gave that vision to John about the future, these were some messages to the churches that existed at that time. There were 7 different churches in the area, and that Jesus said, I have a message, a specific message for each of these churches that I want to get passed on to them. And that's what the first 3 chapters are. And actually, when we read those chapters, even though they were written to some other churches, we see things that apply to us, either as individuals or as a church itself. And as you read chapters 1, 2, and 3, it's kind of, it's just interesting to take the different messages and think, which of these messages to the churches most applies to me? Or which of these messages most applies to our church? Ask God to show you. And I think it's really neat to see how we can take scripture written to somebody else in a different time and find truths that are eternal and that can meet us here today. Then there's Revelation 12 through 14. Basically, in the midst of everything that's kind of going through chronologically, they kind of take this 12 to 14, where there's kind of a little parentheses, and it kind of gives an overview of all of time. And it does it in a very symbolic way. You read about dragons and women in the desert, and you read about these things, and you're like, what in the world is this? But basically, what God is doing here is he's saying, I want to take you back and let you see the big picture of things. And so as you look through chapters 12 to 14, and I got a little tiny outline in the middle of your page there, it talks about when Satan fell at the beginning of time, when he was cast out of heaven, when he became evil. Then we read about Jesus' birth. We read about how Jesus went into heaven and how there ended up being a war in the heaven, and then how God protected his people and how evil still managed to find a way onto the earth. And it basically is a story of the whole time, that there's this spiritual battle going on in heaven and on earth between good and evil. And so 12 to 14 is kind of a synopsis of those things. So if you read those parts, that's how it kind of fits in there. So that kind of shows you a little bit how it's broken down. But when we talk about what happens here on earth and God's judgment and his wrath, he basically is going to give us 3 different sets of judgments. And each set of judgment is going to have 7 judgments under it. So basically, 3 times 7, 21. 21 different judgments, expressions of God's wrath, will be poured out on the earth. Now, for the last several weeks, I've been preaching about the end of time. And we did preach about things that we knew. In Matthew 24 and 25, Jesus is very clear. It says, in light of the end of time, this is how I want you to live now. And I'd go back and read, especially chapter 25, Matthew 25, or go back and listen to the sermons online to see this is what we do know. Now, a lot of these things in Revelation are things that we don't know because they're things that will happen in the future. They're things we don't have we don't have hindsight to go back and understand how all this stuff fits together. But these are things that we are told is going to happen in the future.
And sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't make sense, but we're just going to quickly walk through these judgments. Even though there's 21 judgments, we're going to go through them pretty fast. You're not going to miss lunch today. But I'm trying to whet your appetite to go in and study it and read it more and go with that. Now, when we think about God bringing judgment upon the earth, I'm thinking back to the superhero, the Incredible Hulk. And if you're familiar with him, and I know I grew up watching the show on TV, and he's popular again today, but David Banner would say, "You wouldn't like me when I'm angry," and then he would turn into his superhero monster self. And in a way, that's kind of like what we picture God. It's like, what would God be like angry? Well, this is what it is. This is God angry. But it's a different kind of anger. It's not an anger that is just, I'm blowing up and losing my temper sort of thing. This is an anger that is based in his holiness, in his righteousness. It's not an evil sort of anger. It's a righteous anger. And there are times that we have righteous anger. We can be angry at sin. We can be angry that the world is such a mess. We can be angry when somebody victimizes another person. There is a righteous sort of anger. Now, how we express that, we have to do that in light of the temperaments of the fruit of the Spirit that God has given us. But there is such a thing as a righteous anger. And when God is angry, he has a right to be angry. And he's not just losing his temper and causing problems just to cause problems. David wrote in Psalm 51:4, when he had sinned, he said, "Against you and only you have I sinned, and I've done what is evil in your sight. Therefore, you may be justified in your words, and you are blameless in your judgments." In other words, David understood, when I've sinned and God corrects me, when he disciplines me, when he punishes, he's correct in that. He has the right to be able to do that because he is a holy God. And when we, as a fallen planet, have gone against his will and sinned against him, he has the right to bring that wrath and judgment upon the world. A perfect God can judge sin, and he will judge sin. He's holding back his hand, and we say, why do all these bad things keep happening? Why doesn't God come in and stop it? He doesn't come in and stop it now because he's wanting people to see his grace and his forgiveness. But there will come a time when he is going to come in and put a stop to it. And that's the silver lining on the cloud. We want it all to end. Well, it will end someday. He will come through and bring an end to it all. And in a way, judgment is people getting what they always wanted. They always wanted a life apart from God. Well, now they're getting it. If they didn't want it before, and if God was trying to reach out to them before and they kept ignoring it and pushing it away, now's the time, through the judgment of God, when they get what they want. They want a life apart from God, they're going to get it. Fortunately, for those of us who know Christ, the judgment of God has already fallen. Not on us, but it fell on Jesus, the Son of God. We have experienced God's judgment, but sacrificially through Jesus himself. When Jesus was on the cross, he took the punishment that we all deserve and that the world deserves. And he took the judgment and offers us in place of that life with him. And so just because we are not under judgment, it doesn't mean we were just let off scot-free. Because somebody else had to pay the price, and Jesus did that for us. And when we come to the table here today, when we take of the bread and the cup, we're reminded that Jesus took the judgment for us and has given us in place of that the freedom to be able to be not under that judgment. So when we look at the 21 different judgments, they're found in 3 segments. The first one is called the 7 seal judgments. Just like a document in the old times that had the wax seals on it to show that it had been confidential, as those seals are broken and it's opened up, we see what's inside. We see
the 7 different wraths that God has, the judgments, are listed there. And the first 4 are listed symbolically as different horsemen. There's different color horses. A white horse comes in and brings conquest as kingdoms of the earth start to conquer one another. So there's going to be this mass chaos around the earth as some countries are trying to overtake others, and that is going to take place. Then the red horse brings war, because the part of the conquest is that there's going to be nations fighting one another. You know, if we've seen 2 world wars already, whatever takes place here will be another worldwide war that will make the first 2 look very pale in comparison. The black horse brings worldwide famine. There's going to be a shortage of food throughout the earth. The pale horse brings death to a great number of mankind. A reminder that all of these things together are going to result in a lot of mourning, a lot of loss of lives. But the 5th seal tells us that a number of people who lose their lives will be the Christians. The Christians who are there, not from the judgment of God, but because of the judgment that falls upon mankind. Because of the evil that is in mankind's heart, people are going to be so angry at God for all of these judgments that they're going to start blaming who? The Christians. You're the ones that bring this. It's your God doing this. We don't like you anymore. We talked last week about the Antichrist setting up himself as the ruler of the world, and everybody should worship him, and anybody who doesn't worship him is an enemy. Therefore, Christians, people who worship God, will be seen as enemies, and they will lose their lives as a result of that. Now, the good news is that the martyrs have a place in heaven, and so even though it ends badly, it ultimately ends well. The 6th seal brings a proclamation of God's wrath through natural warnings. This is where we have the earthquakes, the volcanoes, the sun is going to darken, the moon is going to turn red, the meteors are going to crash to the earth. There's just going to be this mass climate destruction. Whether the darkening of the sun and the moon, if that's because of man-made things, if that's because God does something, and we don't know how that's going to be. I know a lot of people, and especially a year ago, were talking about all these red moons that come out once a month or whatever, or signs that the end is coming. But when the Bible talks about red moons, it's in a very different context, so don't get all caught up in the hysteria that if we have a red harvest moon, so many per year this year, that it means something special, because the moon turning red is one of the judgments of God that takes place towards the end of time and is part of God's cataclysmic destruction of the world. It's not just a sign that something's going to happen down the road. These people have got it all wrong. So don't get into the red moon hype. The Bible tells us what it really is about. And if all these things don't seem bad enough already, the 7th seal that God opens doesn't really have a punishment specifically. It's just an announcement that God's going to bring more punishment. Okay? So just at the time when everybody's thinking, okay, God, this is enough, the new one is, it's not over yet. There's more coming. And in fact is, with this one, God gives what's listed here in chapter 8, 30 minutes of silence from heaven. So obviously something's going on before that. Everything's going on, and people are aware that God is sending these punishments to the earth. And all of a sudden, there's silence. And any of you that have either had parents or you are a parent, you know what this is like. When you look at your kid and you give him this, you don't have to say a word, and that's almost worse, isn't it? Okay? That silence can almost be worse than just hearing it. All right? And so I think somehow God is just kind of saying, here, I'm going to get your attention here. Okay? There's silence, and everybody's going to go, uh-oh, what's that mean? So it's going to grab people's attention. So then God's going to bring 7 more punishments. And these are called 7 trumpets. So after the silence, all of a sudden, okay, here comes a new one. And 7 trumpets begin. And the first 4, just like the first 4 of the seals were described as horses,
These are described by the numbers 1/3. So basically, 1/3 of all the vegetation on the earth is going to be destroyed by fire and hail. 1/3 of the ocean water is going to turn to blood, killing the life that's in those parts of the waters. 1/3 of all the fresh water and all the rivers are going to turn bitter, killing all the fish that live there. And 1/3 of the light from the sun, moon, and stars is going to be darkened. Whatever started before the seals is going to intensify by 1/3. The 5th and 6th trumpets announce 2 evil armies that are going to bring destruction to the world. One is an army of locusts, not a locust like a grasshopper locust, but some sort of demonic locusts that are going to be released. If they're being released from hell or what it is, we're told that the earth's going to open up and then these demonic locusts are going to come upon the earth and start stinging people with this very painful sting. It's so painful that people wish that they could just die. They would rather die than have these stings from these locusts. But the scripture tells us that God's going to take death away from them. In other words, they're not going to be able to kill themselves. Now, I don't know if that means they can jump off a 100-story building and get up and survive it. I don't know how that's going to work, but the scripture tells us there in chapter 9 that death will be taken away from them. They have to endure the suffering of these painful stings from these army of locusts. And then it tells us about an army of soldiers. There's a great army of 200,000 soldiers on horses that are going to declare war on the rest of the world. Now, we're not sure what this army is. I mean, it's a very big army. To get an army of 200,000 all on horses, that's a lot of horses and a lot of soldiers. Could it be China? Could it be that there's just sort of an anarchy rebellion of just, crazy people that get together and form their own rebellious army? We don't know what it means, but there's going to be a huge army that's going to just wreak havoc on the rest of the world, and 1/3 of the world population will be killed from that army. So whatever's left from all the other death it's been, 1/3 of the people that are left are going to die as a result of this army. And you can read about it in chapter 9. And then the 7th trumpet's going to blow. And again, it's not a specific destruction, but it's an announcement. The 7th trumpet is an announcement that the kingdom of God is about to come. So this is probably near the very end of the time. While these other things have taken place over the period of the 7 years, this has probably taken place very close to the end chronologically from what we can tell. So God is going to send 7 more judgments as a way to bring final destruction to the evil on the earth and to usher in his kingdom. And these are called bowl judgments. It's like symbolically like God is dumping out a bowl of judgment upon the earth. So there's 7 bowl judgments found in chapter 16. And these are the worst of all. The first one will be sores that will break out on the skin of all of mankind. The second bowl, whereas before we had 1/3 of the waters that was contaminated, now all the oceans will turn to blood. The third one, all the fresh water turns to blood. Basically, the water supply of the earth is cut off. It's poisoned. The fourth bowl pours out on the sun, which intensifies the heat and scorches even people's skins. I mean, you think a sunburn from being out in the sun too long, it hurts. I mean, people are going to have these major sunburns on their bodies because of the heat. But then there's going to be the 5th bowl, darkness, periods of intense darkness upon the earth as well. And that is going to bring pain and emotional misery to people. The 6th bowl is one that we don't understand. In fact, as somebody said, they looked at 100 different Bible commentaries about the 6th one, and they ended up with 50 different interpretations. So this is one of those, we don't know what it means, but it says that the Euphrates River is going to dry up. Okay, now why is this a judgment? Why is this such a big deal? The Euphrates River runs through what's present-day Iraq, but it's going to be in preparation so that the armies can gather together for the major battle at the very end, Armageddon. So it's not necessarily, it's kind of a pre-judgment sort of thing. What does it mean? Is it literally the Euphrates River? Is it something else? Is it symbolic? It's one of those things that has a lot of mystery to us at this point. So we don't know what it is, but we do know that whatever happens there is going to prepare for the seventh bowl, which is the battle that's called Armageddon, where the armies of the earth finally say, we've had it, God. We don't like your judgments anymore, so we're going to go out and fight you. As if a human army can muster the power to be able to come against God. After experiencing all of this and seeing God's power, they're still proud enough to say, we're going to come out and fight you. And so they gather together in the valley, and of course Jesus is going to come down on his white horse with the armies of heaven behind him. That might include us, maybe it's the angels, we don't know exactly who's going to be in that army, but they're going to come down with him, and they're going to wipe out the final group of the army that says that we're going to stand up against God. And that will bring the end of God's judgment. At that point, evil will have been destroyed, the earth will have been destroyed, and you think, this is a beautiful place God created, why would he destroy it all? Well, first of all, he made it great, but we've already ruined it because of sin. And so when God comes in and ruins it all, he does say, I'm going to recreate it. I'm going to clean it all up and make it new again. So we do have the promise that even though it's all going to be a mess and the oceans, the waters will be all blood and everything else will have happened, God's going to clean it all up and make it a perfect place again for those of us to enjoy who are with him. So at this point, evil is going to be destroyed, Satan will be destroyed, everything, and we'll get into that next week when we talk about heaven, because we'll be talking about the judgment seat of God and how God brings some people into heaven, others into hell. What happens with good and evil, that will be next week when we get to that. But suffice it to say at this point, here on earth, all of God's judgments will end. And we're reading Revelation 16, verses 17 to 21. There's a part that where Christ says, it is done. It is done. Which reminds us of what Jesus said on the cross. When he was hanging there and the judgment of God was upon him, one of the words that he said was, it is finished. It is finished. God's judgment has an end. The judgment upon Jesus had an end, and he had victory over that. And we are here today as testimony that the judgment of God upon Jesus Christ on the cross didn't bring death to us, but brought us life. Because Jesus came back to life, and he offers us that very same life. What a great, great honor it is to be able to be a part of that. But God's judgment upon evil will come to an end as well. And he will come to a point where he says, it's done. It is over with. Again, the first judgment took place upon the cross. And that's why we're here to celebrate it, to remember it, to take it to heart. Because it means something to those of us that have faith. That he is the way of salvation. I know today's sermon maybe it's enlightening, but it's kind of hard to walk away and say, what do I do with this? Let it motivate us to reach the world around us. If anything, we don't want the people around us to have to go through the judgment of God. Let them know that God took that for themselves. We can share the good news with them, and we can embrace it ourselves, and we can let it encourage our faith. And to know that when we look at the mess around us, when we watch the news, when we read the newspapers, definitely, there is a good coming. We just have to endure all this bad stuff, and we'll get there. God's still in control. He's on the throne. Let peace fill your hearts. Okay? Jesus told us all this stuff, and in the sermons I went through, not to scare us, not to discourage us, but to let us know, hey, he's with us, and he's going to help us do what needs to be done so that we can usher in his kingdom in the way that it needs to. So we thank God for that. Let me pray.